Hello everyone, welcome to Cribwolf Talks. I am Lino Fera, the host of Cribwolf Talks. For our viewers tuning in to our program, the Cribwolf Talks production team traveled to Ottawa, Canada on March 19, 2024 and videotaped the entire two-day housing conference held by the Intentional Community Consortium, referred to as the ICC. The two-day ICC housing conference established a setting that allowed members of Parliament, senators and ICC members to discuss the housing shortage with reference to the National Housing Strategy introduced in 2017. On today's final episode of our 7-part series, we will showcase 4 guest speakers. The first, an ICC member, Michelle Brooks, and 3 MPs, Bonita, Zarrillo, Mike Morrice, and Scott Aitchison. Please watch this video presentation.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Gary. And thanks, everyone, for being here today and showing an interest in such an important conversation and work that needs to be done by all. I'm honored to be here as a representative and as the chair for Provincial Network. The Provincial Network, unlike Oasis or Community Living or some of the other organizations here today, we actually don't have membership. Our key purpose is to bring together those provincial groups to understand what are the consistent challenges, the trending opportunities, but also the desires of the community and of those groups and the members that they represent. Together, we work with and collaborate with the bureaucracy of government to help influence initiatives, also the development of policies and modification of approaches so that they really represent the groups and the diversity of the need within the developmental service sector and with the families of those living with different disabilities. Together, we communicate and collaborate regularly to really help, as I mentioned, influence initiatives such as things, which is one of our biggest initiatives right now, the Journey to Belonging, which is really looking at a system of reform. The challenge is as we move forward towards a system that place a family in the driver's seat of directing and engaging the supports that they desire, we must really look at the importance of the work of ICC and days like today that amplify the need for deeply affordable housing and improved accessible systems and supports that can deliver on affordable housing. These are key. To enable people to reach their full potential and achieve their individual goals, we must do better in our efforts to provide this deeply affordable housing in communities that are centrally located to resources and opportunities where they can age in place. As the executive director at Participation House Durham and working in the Whitby Durham region, I've seen firsthand the challenge of the shortages of accessible, affordable housing. When we look at the systems that we have in place that are legislated for us to respond to the urgent needs of our community, this past year we've been over budget through our urgent response, and that is to respond to individuals who are homeless and are presenting with significant challenges, or their families within the community, and are not yet attached or connected to organizations and who are languishing on waiting lists. We had over $1 million of overspend, and probably 75 to 80% of that was due to housing needs. The support needs and the reason for the cost were so high is because the housing was not available. And many of those circumstances, the situation probably wouldn't have been in place if there had been housing and we could have proactively supported people. Many of the resources that we get through the Ministry of Community, Children and Social Services are being exasperated beyond the dollars that we're getting because of the housing and the lack of affordable housing, and it's putting people into crisis. So these are real, and these are things happening in a community, and this actually really identifies and highlights for us the necessity to have a collaborative approach, which I've been so happy to hear and see through the conversations over the past few days that there is a deep commitment to that. I'm so humbled by the tireless efforts of the partners of the Provincial Network and the great work I've witnessed through the member groups such as Community Living Ontario, OASIS, and ICC, and specifically for individual people such as Brian Keshen and Gary Gladstone, who have made great strides in helping to make sure that the needs of people with disabilities was reflected within the National Housing Strategy, and also in having conversations where we have MPs and other people come forward where they are very aware of what the challenges are and how they and are helping to bring out their commitments to help us meet those needs. I've heard and I've been inspired by the expressed understandings and the commitments to do better and to prioritize those living with disabilities and to engage shovel-ready solutions, such as I heard from Karis, and find solutions that can plan a reality to prevent such situations as those in the past. Many resources, much time and effort is not being used. We have solutions that are there. We just need to continue to do better and to improve those systems that actually are putting the sticks in our spokes. So thank you to all for being here today. Your commitment to understand and be part of the solutions and to change, the solutions of change and the outputs that are needed is so greatly appreciated. We have much work to do, but I'm encouraged that through shared passion, driven, purposeful efforts, we can together deliver on deeply affordable, fully accessible housing and change the trajectory of the future and the experiences of people living with disabilities. So thank you for having me here today. I really appreciate it. Keep up the great work, and I look forward to the future.
Get away, madam.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. As you know, Bonita has been a great supporter of the ICC and a continued supporter in the House for persons with challenges. And we are very excited this morning to invite her to come and speak to us and speak with us and help us to understand from the House perspective what is going to be able to be possible, and then also to bring back our concerns and our questions and our responses to the House to also help move forward the agenda that we have for housing for everyone, no matter what their needs are and no matter what care they require. So please welcome Bonita Zarrillo, MP, NDP critic for Infrastructure and Communities, Disabilities, Inclusion, and Deputy Health Minister.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that. Thank you. It's so great to see all of you here today. Thank you so much. I'm visiting from the unceded and traditional territory of the Coquitlam, which is just outside of Vancouver in British Columbia. And I appreciate the time to come and speak to you today. And I wanted to leave quite a bit of time for questions, so hopefully I will be quick on my remarks, because I wanted to share with all of you that I was also a city councillor for 8 years in one of the fastest growing municipalities in BC, but was also on the disability file at that point in time. And I take the point about the B3s, and on our committee, it was always a question of, what happens on an evacuation. And in our municipality, it was always left to the person to have someone to phone. That's the way they were addressing it. So I take your point on that. I have some prepared remarks, which I'm going to say, and then we can open to questions. Is that all right, Gary? All right. So the National Housing Strategy Act embeds Canada's international human rights obligation to implement the right to adequate housing. but the national housing strategy is missing recognition of the additional barriers to housing faced by persons with disabilities. I know you all know this. Article 19 of the International Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities notes that equal rights of all persons with disabilities to live independently and to inclusion into the community is something that we must uphold here in Canada. But Canada is failing to live up to this obligation to ensure adequate, accessible, and affordable housing for persons with disabilities, and everyone in this room is aware of this, and that's what we're trying to fix. We know that all of this has been exacerbated with the housing crisis, and you talked about the Rapid Housing Initiative, oversold immediately all the time. It's very hard to reach that a Rapid Housing Initiative to get the funds. And this means that now in Canada, persons with disabilities are overrepresented in the homeless population. 45% of Canadians homeless have a physical or mental disability, and core housing need is at least 16% higher for persons with disabilities. And in BC, nearly 4,000 people living with disabilities are on a wait list to find an accessible home, exacerbating again the demand and exceeding the availability. And I spoke yesterday about the fact that when I was a city councillor, we tried to get 8 units of accessible and supportive housing with Vancouver Resource Society, 5-hour public hearing. In a 25-story tower, it took 5 hours of a public hearing just to get approval for 5 units. So even with all these known facts, only 5% of units in BC are targeted for accessibility, despite the fact that 15 to 20% of Canadians need those units. So let's not forget how we got into this situation where housing is unaffordable and inaccessible. And I'm going to get a little political here. Conservative and Liberal governments, provincially and federally, have overseen the financialization of housing. And I know all of you have seen it in your communities in the last 6-7 years. Instead of protecting our social and accessible housing stock, they encouraged upzoning and gentrification in the name of density, forcing persons with disabilities living in poverty and those that don't have the social supports they need out of their homes. These density dreams padded the pockets of developers and investors, and this financialization was not working for everyday Canadians. There's room here for change. So here we are on the hope piece of this. There is room here for change, and I saw the presentation today and I thank you for it. I know a lot of money gets spent, and when they don't come to fruition, it's heartbreaking. And Gary, I take your point that the funds that come from the government are always saying shovel ready, we want it to be shovel ready. So those are two things that I'm taking away from here that we need to potentially change. But this room can help to change. We can bring government and developers along and have them work with persons with disabilities, not against them. The National Housing Act has legislated that the Government of Canada's housing policy is required to recognize human rights, a human right to adequate housing, and it is in international law. So housing is an inherent and essential to dignity and well-being of all persons, and the government can do better, and we can do it together. So I just wanted to just open the floor, because I will take questions too, even on municipal, if I can help to share some insight on that. Thank you.
To hear now, and for me to introduce Mr. Mike Morrice, the MP Mike Morrice from Kitchener Centre. And as I thought about this introduction, I thought, how do you introduce this guy? Kitchener Centre, obviously a friend of Kitchener. Caris Disability Services, I can call him a friend of Caris. KW Hab, definitely a great partner there. And then you think about all the great things that he is doing on behalf of absolutely every Canadian citizen that there is. I would just simply call you a friend and an advocate for us all. So, MP Morrice, please.
Well, thank you, David. That's, I guess, the job of what a person is supposed to do here as an elected person is to fight for Canadians. And so if that is what you think I've been doing, then I hope to continue doing that. Thanks for that. It's nice to be back with you again this year. you already heard from me once yesterday, and so what I was thinking about in terms of the conversation we can continue is to have more of an interactive. I'll be really brief to share a few of what I'm seeing happening on the Hill and the importance of you all being here. And then I thought if it was okay, if I don't get cut off, we could just kind of shift it into a conversation. My concern is when you all spend time on the Hill, you shouldn't just be hearing from politicians talking at you. The whole point of you being here is that we can hear from you. And this being a caucus morning, I'm not able to stay for too long, and so I really want to make sure I get a chance to hear from you all. I think the short of it from my perspective right now is that we need more voices on the Hill talking both about the actions required when it comes to housing and the actions required when it comes to centering the experience of people with disabilities. Those voices need to be amplified, and we need to be hearing more MPs speaking about the specific things they will be doing to advocate on both of those fronts. I use C22 as an example because every one of my colleagues stood up to support the Canada Disability Benefit Act back in June. That is an important piece of legislation. However, on its own, it's performative nonsense in that it doesn't actually require anything to happen. There is no benefit today to a person with a disability as a result of that bill getting passed until regulations are completed, until money is funded in this year's budget to deliver on that. And we will hear some people say, well, you can't go and fund the benefit. You need to finish negotiating with provinces and territories and all this. That's not true at all. When it came to the child care benefit, for example, and really important work that this government did there, well, they put money on the table first. Then they negotiated with that clear commitment already made, and then legislation was the last step. When it comes to people with disabilities, though, it's reversed. And I think it's on all of us to demonstrate as MPs that we are serious about this. We do that through budgets. Budgets are about priorities. We've got a budget coming out on April 16th. I understand a number of folks were at a press conference this morning. I think it's so important that your voices are getting heard when it comes to that budget. We need to see this government fund the Canada Disability Benefit in this year's budget. If it were to be done, regardless of what happens in the election that likely won't be till October 2025, much more difficult to remove a benefit that's been put in place than to advocate, again, another election campaign where people with disabilities are going to have this commitment made, this promise made. We need to get it done before the election. On housing, really briefly, it's the same story. I'm a little bit more optimistic. We've heard some, I think, promising signs in the media from the minister that this government is getting the message on housing, that if they want to continue to govern, they will need to demonstrate that the right to housing needs to be more than a preamble in a bill, and that the federal government has the most fiscal capacity of any level of government. And so we need to see them get back into social housing the way we used to. The number I cite is from the 1970s. 40% of all housing starts had federal assistance. Today, our social housing stock, it's down to 3%. It's the bottom of the G7. Even as those of us who are calling for this government to double social housing, even if we doubled social housing, we'd still be the middle of the pack in the G7. But what it means is that in communities like mine, Kid Rehabilitation would be building projects that we need. Caris Disability Services would be building projects that they are keen to get built. And we need, of course, the province at the table. Much easier to do that when we have the federal government in place. I'm hearing more and more stories, though, where the province, surprisingly, is there first and the federal government isn't. That shouldn't be the case. It should be the other way around. I believe the minister right now is true in his remarks. We're going to need to see that followed through on in the budget.
Let me introduce to you Scott Aitchison, who's going to be bringing us his wisdom. MP, Conservative, Shadow Minister for, I was trying to figure out Shadow Minister. I was going to make a comment, but I won't. It's good. Can you do this? Right?
Yeah, it's okay.
Anyway, Minister for Housing and Diversity and Inclusion. Welcome to the ICC.
Thank you. Thank you all very much for having me. It's great to be back. I realize my comments are now going to be very brief because
I've just learned I'm supposed to bring you my wisdom, so that'll be a fairly quick discussion, unfortunately. No, I'm kidding. There's a little bit of wisdom. Yes. I understand that as well, that we've structured this today, so I'll say a few words, but then we'll actually have a nice conversation, which I'm more inclined to do, believe it or not. Despite the fact that there's a politician in front of a microphone, I will keep it brief. We all know that the CMHC has told us that we need to build 3.5 million homes, more homes in Canada in the next 10 years. That's about 6 million homes, so that works out about 750,000 units a year. The most we've ever built in the history of this country was about 260,000 in a year. That was in the 1970s. So we got a ways to go. And of course, too many of you in this room know that one of the most difficult parts of building housing is the permission, just to get the permission to build the home. The delays, the fees, the charges at the local level are among the most troublesome part of the whole housing continuum. And of course, you all know too that housing is essential. It's fundamental. Anybody can expect to live a fulfilling, self-actualized life without at least a warm, safe, and secure bed to sleep in every night. But in truth, we tax housing to the tune of about 33% a unit. That's the average across Canada. Every single housing unit, the taxes and fees and charges from government are about 33%. Nobody makes more money on housing than governments. That effectively means we tax housing kind of at similar rates to what we tax cigarettes and alcohol. That doesn't make a lot of sense. It's a huge hindrance to getting more units built. I think about how much more we could accomplish if we could reduce that burden just a little bit. Grease the skids, make things happen a little faster, relieve some of the costs and fees related to the carrying charges, the consulting fees, and all the other things. And that's frankly what us conservatives are focused on, is reducing that burden, lowering the burden to getting new housing built, and reducing the red tapes, speeding up the process. And I think for too long, CMHC has been part of the problem, part of the burden. I know many of you have dealt with the CMHC, and I won't spend my whole time slagging them, but it's not easy to get an answer from the CMHC. It takes too long, and the results are just not there. So Conservatives are going to focus very much on what we can do at the federal level to speed things up at the CMHC. We're going to turn it into the Get Homes Built organization. Not because we're mean, scary Tories. Some of us are, but not because we are, but because we believe that we need results. In a crisis, you pull every resource together, all players together, and you tackle the issue head on. And we're talking around the edges too much about this issue. And so I'm from Muskoka. Many of you, I'm sure, are aware. I'm Parry, Muskoka. I'm a Huntsville boy. And of course, people are quite correct to think that that's the summer playground of the uber rich and some famous. And that's true. It is. For the record, I am the poorest of the rich and famous in the community. But for the people who live in Parry, Muskoka year-round and work there, most people don't realize that the median family income in Muskoka and Parry Sound is about 20% below the provincial average in Ontario. So a lot of people that work in service-related industries, seasonal work. I know a lot of people that work 2 or 3 part-time jobs just to make ends meet. And we know that this struggle is especially real for persons with developmental disabilities. In Muskoka, there are over 600 families, in a population of 80,000, 600 families on a wait list for affordable housing. Vacancy rates in Huntsville, my home community, have been under 1% for over a decade. And those of you in this room know all too well that people with disabilities face wait times that are, on average, 10 times longer than everybody else. That's unacceptable. That's unacceptable in a society as ours. Any society, really. But especially so here. We can do better. We must do better. So I'll wrap up by saying I'm happy to take your questions. If Conservatives form a government, you're going to find a very willing partner to make things move faster, help with infrastructure, and make sure that federal resources are focused where they need to be focused, on supporting those who are most vulnerable in our society, ensuring that supportive housing is supported with the right amount of federal funds, and so that we can not just improve, but solve this crisis and make the lives of all Canadians better. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Scott.
I trust you have appreciated witnessing firsthand how the issues associated with a lack of affordable and deeply affordable supportive housing for persons with diverse abilities were discussed by those who spoke at the ICC Housing Conference, as viewed over our 7 episodes of Cribwolf Talks. I wanted to thank all of the participants of this very important housing conference, which included our MPs and senators that took the time to appear and speak to our attendees with their perspective on the various housing issues, and all of the ICC member organizations who spoke to us on the housing projects they have built or wanting to build. Every individual with diverse abilities and their caregiver parents are patiently waiting for supportive housing options that will allow an individual with diverse abilities to live safely in harmony with others in the community they have chosen. I feel for everyone, and I can only say let's continue to advocate for the benefit of those we love, as we must find the ideal housing solution. Thank you for tuning in, and please keep watching our program. I am Lino Fera. Have a great day and stay well.